Okay, so we're going to record this evening's program, so people who might have missed it can watch it at a later time. And what we're going to do right now is, first of all, welcome to our Zoom program. It's about creating paradise on earth, the Jewish quest. And what I'm going to try and do in the next 45 minutes to an hour, whatever, is demonstrate my conviction that the purpose of Judaism is to move humanity back to paradise. So I'm going to try and show that with by the parallel of the famous paradigm for many mythological stories, which is called the hero's journey. So let's start with a share screen here. And there you have Creating Paradise on Earth, a Jewish quest. And we're gonna, the most famous example in modern movie making history of the hero's journey is, of course, Luke Skywalker and Star Wars. And George Lucas, when he wrote the story, had studied Joseph Campbell, and Joseph Campbell had written some books about the hero's journey, but it had been long known in literary circles before that. And this is from a quotation from, I just Googled it to find this quotation, Masterclass, right? Those guys who try to sell you programs. Writing 101, what is the hero's journey? So here's what it says. A lonely hero who is trying to find himself. A sudden and unexpected journey, promising adventure and peril. A test of character, strength, and skill. An ultimate battle that tests the hero's resolve. And then a triumphant return home. Okay, so that's what the hero's journey sort of model is about. And what I'm going to argue is that's, in a way, what the Bible is trying to tell us as well. So let's start with the Garden of Eden. Just a picture from the internet here about this idyllic pastoral scene. The lion is lying down with the lamb. By the way, originally in the Bible it was a wolf, but whatever. And a bunch of other birds and fish and plants and fruit and all that. That's what the Garden of Eden looked like. And of course, when Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and bad that God told them not to eat, according to the story, Adam and Eve are driven out of the Garden of Eden. This is some artist depiction. I just want to show you this kind of angel with the wings thing. This is kind of a classic artistic depiction of angels. I don't know what angels are supposed to look like, but anyway, this is what they usually are depicted as. And this sword, which is definitely not what we're talking about, as we're going to see in a minute. Okay, so God, when he kicked them out, said, now that man, or humanity, has become like one of us, knowing good and bad, what if he and she should stretch out his or her hand and also take from the tree of life and then live forever? So the Lord God banished them from the Garden of Eden to till the soil from which they were taken. And he drove out the man and the woman and stationed east of the Garden of Eden cherubim. That's a specific kind of angel, right? In the Bible, there are different kinds of angels, and this is called cherubim. Now, cherubim in medieval art are often depicted as little baby boys with wings fluttering around in heaven. I don't know where they got that idea. Modern Bible scholars say that cherubim were, with the Hebrew word cheruvim, are actually these kind of fearsome-looking angels with large animal bodies. Whatever it is, there's these specialized kind of angels. And the fiery, every-turning sword. What does that sound like to you? To me, it's a lightsaber, of course, right? This is Luke Skywalker's story. So these cherubim have these lightsabers in their hand, and they're guarding the way to the tree of life. Here is a picture of the lightsaber and some other person's drawing. And cherubs, really? I don't know. Totally different view of those angels. Of course, I chose this picture because I'm a terrible artist, and I couldn't even begin to, I would be stick figures if I drew it. So this is what I found, and just pointing out the lightsaber there. Okay, so the question for us tonight is, if God really did not want humanity to return to Eden, why didn't God just destroy it? Why did God leave it there with the angels and the lightsaber guarding the entrance? Doesn't this sound like the perfect setup for the hero's journey? Okay, it's really three questions, but anyway, that's the question, right? Why didn't God just destroy it? The fact that it's still there from the beginning of the book to the end of the book means somehow maybe we're supposed to find it and fight our way back there and get past those angels that are guarding it with their lightsabers. Okay, fast forward to the book of Exodus. So God is now trying to create an ideal community, and he is going to give us a bunch of laws. And in Exodus chapter 25, he says, "Let them make for me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them, exactly as I show you the pattern of the tabernacle." By the way, I never knew what a tabernacle was when I was a kid. Tabernacle is just a fancy word for tent, okay? It's a tent. Or a mishkan is called in Hebrew. Mishkan means a dwelling place, right? So really the mishkan, the tent, is this thing right over here, but there's a courtyard around the tent over here, and this is where the sacrifices were done, sacrificing animals, and this is supposed to be a water laver. That's probably very small. It was probably a much bigger water laver. And then you had the tent. We're going to look at the tent in a minute. So it's supposed to make it exactly the pattern of the tabernacle, the pattern of its furnishings, so shall you make it. God's going to tell us exactly what it's supposed to look like. Here's a diagram. So this is that courtyard. The wall here, this black line represents the wall, creating that courtyard. And the middle thing over here is the tent itself, the tabernacle. And so we're going to focus on this tabernacle. I don't know if your screens are big enough to be able to read this part of it over here. So I'm going to give you another slide where it's blown up. Honey, I blew up the tabernacle. Okay, anyway, here it is. So there are several, whoops, I don't know how we got to there. Go back here. There are several furnishings in the tabernacle. Three of them in particular I want to look at right now. The first one is this Ark of the Covenant, which is inside the holiest area, the Holy of Holies. That Holy of Holies is separated by a curtain from the regular holy place. And inside the regular holy place, we're going to look at two other items. One of them is the table of shewbread. I don't know, it's sometimes spelled with S-H-E-W. Have no idea. That must be some British thing. But table of showbread, we'll talk about what that is a little bit later. And over here, you're looking down on it, so it's very hard to figure out what it is. That is the seven-branched lampstand. I'm going to skip over the altar of incense, but at the end of the program, if you have some questions about that or suggestions of what I can do with that, let me know. But we're going to look at these other three things: the Ark of the Covenant, the seven-branched lamp, and the table of shewbread. Okay, those are the three furnishings. Let's start with the Ark of the Covenant. In the book of Exodus, chapter 25, it says, "They shall make an ark of acacia wood and overlay it with pure gold, overlay it inside and out, and deposit in the ark the tablets of the pact." What tablets are those? The 10 Commandments, of course, which I'm going to give you. Make 2 cherubim. There's that kind of angel again. 2 cherubim, not just any angels, but cherubim of gold. Make 1 cherub at one end and the other cherub at the other end. They'll have wings spread out above, shielding the cover with their wings. They'll confront each other, their faces being turned towards the other. And they place the top of the cover on the ark and deposit inside the ark the pact that I will give you. So here is an artist drawing of these 2 cherubs, again, trying to draw them like human figures with their angels covering, their wings covering their faces. They're facing toward each other. And inside this golden box here is the tablets of the 10 Commandments. So we talked about George Lucas a minute ago, and of course, his friend Steven Spielberg made another famous movie about this. Highly recommended if you haven't seen it in the last 30 years. Raiders of the Lost Ark, a lot of fun movie. Anyway, that's this ark, the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, so that's what it's supposed to look like. And these 2 cherubs, isn't that curious? There's these 2 cherubs on here, and there's 2 cherubs guarding the entrance to the Garden of Eden. Just a to give away some of the story here, these are the only 2 places in the entire 5 books of Moses where cherubs are mentioned, right? They're not mentioned anywhere else. They guard the entrance to the Garden of Eden, and they sit on top of this box. That's it. Oh, well, That's not entirely it. They're also woven into the fabric that is around the tent. That tent was covered with fabric, and apparently they're supposed to be in the pattern there, but in the tent of meeting. Okay, now let's look at the 7-branch lamp. Okay, here's an artist depiction, and it looks really weird, right? It's got these weird things here. What are these things sticking up on this branch here? Right up here are the bowls. Of course, we didn't have candles back then, so you burned olive oil. So the bowls were filled with olive oil. They put a wick inside and they burn all night. But what is this with these weird branches? Here's what it says in the book of Exodus, chapter 25. 6 branches shall issue from its side, 3 on one side and 3 on the other side. On one branch, that is, let's say on each of the branches, there will be 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms. That's what these are supposed to be. 1, 2, 3. 3 almond blossoms on this side, 3 almond blossoms on this side. 3 almond blossoms here, 3 almond blossoms there. What the heck is that about? Make it 7 lamps. The lamp shall be so mounted as to give the light on its front side. Well, when you look at that, I already told you that I'm artistically challenged myself, and I don't know how to draw. I draw stick figures. And if somebody was to ask me to draw a tree, I still draw the tree the way I used to draw a tree when I was in kindergarten. And that is, you make the trunk, and then you symmetrically make the branches coming out from the trunk like this, right? So I'm just saying that even without very much imagination, when you look at this lamp, what does it look like? It looks like the way Rabbi Morgen draws trees. And then, of course, they're decorated with almonds. So what kind of tree is this? Well, it's an almond tree. So here's what a modern Bible scholar says about this curious thing. And this is from Nahum Sarna. He's a famous Jewish Bible scholar. Wrote a commentary on the book of Genesis and a commentary on the book of Exodus. And about this lampstand, he said, the trunk and with its branches unmistakably evokes the image of a tree. Quite possibly it represents the tree of life. The inflorescence of the almond tree, right? Those almond blossoms. Why? Certainly bears symbolic value, for that tree is the earliest spring flowering plant in the land of Israel. Thus, the almond flower is a symbol of life renewed and sustained. So because it's decorated with almond blossoms, Nahum Sarna suggests, and the almond tree is the first to come back to life in the springtime, this obvious image of a tree, this golden tree that's in the tabernacle, must be perhaps the tree of life. And the number 7, he adds, the totality of the lamp is an expression of completeness and perfection. And what else does it represent? Creation. Back to the Garden of Eden, right? God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. 7 branches, 7 days of creation. Back to the Garden of Eden. Finally, the lights constitute the most powerful symbol of all, for light intimates both life itself and the presence of the giver of all life. So that's what the lampstand represents, according to Nahum Sarna. Quite possibly represents the tree of life, which of course stood in the Garden of Eden. So if the ark has these cherubs on it, which also guard the Garden of Eden, and the lamp is the tree of life from the Garden of Eden, what about that table of the showbread that I talked about? Okay, here's a picture of the table with the showbread. It's got 12 shelves here. And on each shelf is a loaf of bread. And they're out for display, and they're not to be eaten. That's why they're showbread. They're just on display, and they're changed every week. You know, might get moldy after the week, but miraculously did not get moldy for a whole week. And so every week the bread would be changed in this table of showbread. It's a golden table again, 12 shelves. Each shelf has a loaf of bread. Here's the description of it in Exodus 25. And on the table you shall set the bread of display to be before me always. Wow. Okay, so is there a connection between this table of showbread and the Garden of Eden story? Could there be some connection there? So the first two things I pointed out, the cherubs, lots of Bible commentators point out the fact that the cherubs only appear twice, once at the Garden of Eden and once guarding the Ark of the Covenant. And Nachum Sarna already pointed out the tree of life maybe is the lamp. But nobody talked about the table of showbread, so this was my idea. So having seen the first two things, I went back to the story of the Garden of Eden. I said, where's the bread, man? Where's the bread? And sure enough, you probably already know, because I kind of hinted at it here. When Adam and Eve get kicked out of the Garden of Eden, God says to Adam, because you did as your wife said, and you ate of the tree about which I command you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed be the ground because of you. By toil shall you eat it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles shall it sprout for you. But your food shall be the grasses of the field. By the way, we are supposed to be vegetarians. By the sweat of your brow shall you get bread to eat. Everybody knows that sentence, right? By the sweat of your brow you shall get bread to eat. Well, what does that imply? You didn't have to work very hard to get bread in Eden. Why not? Well, maybe because it's sitting there on a table already baked for you. Right? And by the way, I know that's a bit of a stretch, but it's not so much of a stretch because even our sages 2,000 years ago, when they talked about paradise, they talked about Gan Eden. One of the things they used to describe Gan Eden is your bread is ready baked. They literally said that. Your bread is ready baked, already in the garden. So it would seem that this table of showbread is also a symbol of the Garden of Eden. 3 symbols of the Garden of Eden are contained in this traveling tent. What is up with that? Well, for that, we need to understand first what is the essence of Judaism. Now, unfortunately, this was the fun part. Well, the whole thing is fun in my opinion, but this was the artistic part. It had pictures. The rest of it's not going to be so illustrated. So we're going to spend some time looking at some text. I apologize for that in advance, but I'm a rabbi. This is my job. I'm supposed to teach texts. And so we're going to look at some Jewish sources to try and understand what is the essence of Judaism? What is the purpose of our faith? Like, what is our mission? What does God want us to do? And it's not actually a novel question, surprisingly enough. Jews, for at least 2,000 years, have been asking that very question. And here's how they answered it. So you've probably heard, well, here, but we don't have to share screen on this. You've probably heard, first of all, we talked about the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments were in the Ark of the Covenant. But as every good Jew knows, we have many more commandments than just 10, right? Hundreds of commandments. You don't have to be a rabbi to realize that. If you just kind of glance through, you shift through the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, you'll see dozens and dozens of commandments all over the place, right? There's clearly hundreds of commandments. Somewhere along the line, a rabbi came up with the idea that there are 613 commandments, to be precise. And where is the source for that? Okay, I'm glad you asked. That is from this source. It's from the Talmud, from the Babylonian Talmud, in a tractate called Makot, which deals with a certain kind of punishment that the courts would mete out to people who did certain kinds of crimes. But as the Talmud often does, it meanders in a discussion that leaves the topic it's supposed to be discussing. And so in one of those meanderings on page 23b, Rabbi Simlai teaches there are 613 mitzvot, or commandments, that were stated to Moses. By the way, the bold-faced type on this document is a translation of the actual Aramaic words in the Talmud. The non-bold-faced type in between is the editor of this translation adding some words so that it'll make sense. Part of the trouble of trying to read the Talmud is it's cryptic. It's like footnotes. It's like you and I might take notes at a lecture somewhere, and we don't write down every single word the professor says. We take down a few words here and there and then reconstruct the argument later for ourselves. That's how the Talmud is written. So there's a few words written out, and you have to sort of fill in the blanks. And so here the editor is filled in the blanks the way this editor wanted to fill in those blanks. Okay, with that said, Rabbi Simlai taught there's 613 commandments taught to Moses. That's what he said. Why did he come up with that number? He says there are 365 prohibitions, things we're not supposed to do, corresponding to the number of days in the solar year. Sometimes they're called negative commandments. I think the term negative commandments is kind of negative. So I don't like the term negative commandments. And it's not negative. What they meant was prohibitions, things we're not supposed to do. So there's 365 of those, and they correspond to the number of days in the solar year. And there are 248 positive, see, that's the opposite of negative, positive mitzvot, right? I don't like that term either, so I prefer obligations, right? The opposite of prohibitions are obligations. So we have 365 things we're not supposed to do and 248 obligations that we are supposed to do, and that corresponds to the number of limbs in a person's body. Okay, I am not a doctor. I have no idea how do we count limbs to get to 248. But that was what they said. That was apparently the medicine of their time. I'm going to stop right here for a second. And since we have, how many people do we have on here? 18 people. Good. So if you would like to unmute yourself, I'm going to ask this question. What point was he trying to make? Why did he say 613, 365 like this, 248 like that? What was he trying to say? Anybody?
Maybe that the human body is supposed to be perfect, a reflection of divinity, and every day there's a new challenge of something negative that you shouldn't be doing.
Yes, I like that. That's very good. Anybody else? Nobody else wants to venture a guess? Okay, everybody's happy with Neil's guess. Okay, well, I'm pretty much the same thing. What I would say is this: every day of the year, there is something you can do for God, or I guess something you're not supposed to do because God told you not to do it, right? But every day of the year, there is something that you can do or not do that God wants you. You know, you can respond to God's command every day. And with every part of your body, every limb of your body, there's something that you can do that God wants you to do. Every day, every part of your body, you can be doing something to promote this agenda, whatever this agenda is. Now, having said that, my interpretation of Rabbi Simlai is he didn't actually sit down and count 613 commandments in the Torah. He knew there were hundreds of commandments, and he wanted to make the point we just made. And so that's how he expressed it. I would add to that when later commentators tried to take him literally and figure out, so what are those 365 prohibitions and what are those 248 obligations, they argued. Of course, we're Jews. We argue. So they argued about which one counts as an obligation, which one doesn't count, which is a repetition of something that was said before, which is a subheading of something that was said before, and whatever. And there's about 60 or 70 things that there's disagreement about, which only furthers my point that I don't think there really was supposed to be a fixed number. The point he was really trying to make was every day, every part of your body, you can do something for God. But if you like to believe there's still 613, that's okay too. That leads to another problem. Most Jews back then were not scholars. And most Jews today, don't have time to take several years out of their life to go study Talmud or whatever. Hopefully they come to synagogue and they hear the rabbi's sermon every now and then, or take classes like this and learn something about our faith and tradition. But, most Jews aren't experts. And 613 is a big number. So, Rabbi, what am I supposed to do? Don't tell me 613 commandments. I don't have time to study that. Give me your elevator speech about what I need to know. What is your soundbite? These are all things, of course, they wouldn't have said 2,000 years ago, but they would have used whatever metaphor would have applied in a similar fashion, right? Tell me what I need to know in a quick thing. One person says, while I stand on one foot, so that I can be a good Jew and get on with my life. And that's exactly what Rabbi Simlai, or the editor of the Talmud, does in the rest of this passage that many people seem to overlook for some reason. We're going to skip the rest of this paragraph here and go over here. King David takes those 613 and he reduces them to 11. Forget 613. I got 11 for you. And where is it from? Psalms chapter 15. A Psalm of David. Lord, Who shall sojourn in your tabernacle? Ooh, there's that tabernacle again. Who shall dwell upon your sacred mountain? He who walks wholeheartedly, works righteousness, speaks truth in his heart, has no slander on his tongue, nor does evil to his neighbor, nor takes up reproach against his relative, in whose eye a vile person is despised. He honors those who fear the Lord. He takes an oath to his own detriment and changes it not. He neither gives money on interest, nor takes a bribe against the innocent. He who performs these shall never be moved. Right? So 11 commandments, and you're good. Question for you. Are any of those ritual commandments? Maybe I should share the screen again. Are any of those ritual commandments? I think they're all about being honest, virtuous, kind, just, fair. I don't really see, it's nothing about Shabbat or Kashrut, for instance, in here. Just saying. By the way, I'm a conservative rabbi. Of course, the rituals are important. Don't walk away from here saying, oh, Rabbi Morgen said we don't have to keep Shabbat anymore. I didn't say that. I'm just saying when we're trying to get to the essence of what Judaism is about, what is the goal? What is the ultimate purpose of this agenda? It looks like it's all pretty much ethical stuff. Okay, so then Rabbi Simle goes on, and Isaiah reduced it to 6 commandments. By the way, does anybody want to read instead of me? Anybody want to read instead? I'll put it back up on the screen in a second. No takers?
It's too small for me. I can't read on the
Okay,
screen.
sorry. Okay, well, I'll read it. Okay, so Isaiah says, I can reduce this to 6. He who walks rightly and speaks uprightly, he who despises the gain of oppression, who shakes his hands from holding of bribes, who stops his ears from hearing blood and shuts his eyes from looking upon evil. Yeah, nice 6, all ethical principles. My favorite, though, is Micah. Micah reduced it to 3. Many people know this verse. If you don't, this is like, everybody should memorize this. Micah's brilliant. I love 3s, first of all, but it's a good 3. It has been told you, O human, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, only to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God, right? What I see often in the 2 major axes of morality in the Bible are about justice and kindness. And here Micah includes those in his trilogy. Do justice, love mercy, and by the way, walk humbly with God, right? Don't be so narcissistic, self-centered, egotistical. You're not the only person on the planet. Remember your place. You are one of God's creatures, and there's a few billion other God's creatures on the planet. By the way, the whole planet is God's, so take care of it. Micah, brilliant statement. It's a good summary of Judaism. Well, now they're going to try and reduce it to beyond that, and I'm not too happy with the following ones because it gets too general. But anyway, Isaiah says, so says the Lord, observe justice and perform righteousness. And that may sound like 2 same things, justice and righteousness. The word for righteousness, I believe, is tzedakah, which is justice or righteousness, but later Hebrew also understands it as kindness, like as in giving tzedakah, giving charity to people who need it. So maybe he's 2 different things here, or maybe they're the same kind of thing. Amos supposedly reduces it to 1 thing, so says the Lord, seek me and live. That sounds a little like the Terminator, you know, if you want to live, follow me. But anyway, here he says, seek me and live. I'm not exactly sure how Amos works out a way of life from that, except I suppose if you realize that you are a creature of God and God created everything else, then the rest of follows, right? You have to take care of the rest of God's creatures and creation. But whatever. There's another way to understand this too. Rabbis, the text I didn't bring in, say that we're supposed to imitate God's compassion and kindness, and they give examples of that. Even Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzchak objects to this last one of Amos, too vague. He says, go to Habakkuk. Righteous person shall live by his faith. Again, I'm not too sure what Habakkuk means by this. So I'm not too much of a fan. I'm a rabbi. I can comment on this. I You're able to comment on this as well. We're very egalitarian in the Jewish world. I'm not too happy with reducing Judaism to these couple of one or two things, but I like Micah's 3. Anyway, let's move on to some other. That's only one passage. So you could say, Rabbi, that's only one place. Show me other examples of what is the essence of Judaism. Okay, here's one from Hillel from a different tractate of the Talmud. And most people know this story. A person wants to convert to Judaism, but he will only convert to Judaism if Hillel can give him the elevator speech about what is Judaism. Tell me what I need to know while I stand on one foot. And Hillel replies, what you find hateful, do not do to your neighbor. That's the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and study. Right. Of course, you need to learn the details, but if you want the essence of Judaism, don't hurt anybody. Look, Hillel, great sage. That's what he said. Rabbi Akiva, a sage of about 200 years later, was asked this question also. What is the most important principle in the Torah? And he said, love your neighbor as yourself. Right. So again, the fact that this question is being asked many different places in the Talmud indicates that this was a common problem back then, just as it is today. Most Jews are busy earning a living and raising a family and taking care of other things, and they don't have time to study all day. And they want it to be good. They want to know what to do, but they need it in a simpler format. And so they asked rabbis, what do I need to know? And this is how they summarized it. Rabbi Akiva's colleague Ben Azai countered, I have a better verse for you, Rabbi Akiva. How about this one? This is the descendants of Adam in the day of God's creating Adam. In the image of God, he made him. Right? Better than loving your neighbor as yourself? Just recognize that every human being you meet is created in the image of God. That's the most important principle, because then therefore you should not say, since I have been shamed, let my neighbor be shamed. Because if you do, know whom you put to shame. In the image of God, he created him. Anytime you hurt another human being, you are hurting an image of God. That's not a good idea. So again, a very sort of a central ethical teaching is the foundation of Judaism. I like threes, and so I like Micah's 3, and I like Shimon HaTzadik, and I'm going to end with this one. Another thing that many people are familiar with, Shimon HaTzadik said in a text called Pirkei Avot, Chapters of the Ancestors. Shimon the Righteous was from the remnants of the Great Assembly, and he used to say, on 3 things the world stands. I think he meant the Jewish world. On the Torah, that's studying our wisdom. So even if you don't end up being a rabbi or a scholar or a sage, you can still study Torah at your leisure, and whatever you learn, and that's a good thing. So learn. The more you learn, the better off, the more wisdom you gain. On the service, that is the worship of God, recognize that there is a God who is a creator. So spend time meditating on that, and then do acts of loving kindness. Another nice summary of Judaism. Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. Torah, worship of God, and acts of loving kindness. Okay, now I promised that I am a conservative rabbi, so I definitely am not recommending abandoning Shabbat, God forbid, or Kashrut, God forbid, or any of the other rituals of Judaism, wearing tefillin or tzitzit, or putting a mezuzah on the doorpost of your house. They all have purposes. They're not the essence of Judaism, but they are valuable for what they do. So what do ritual commandments do? They remind us of our values, our ideals, and our beliefs. They remind us of the sacredness of time and the sacredness of life itself. They help us to develop an intimate relationship with our Creator. You see, human beings, we're forgetful. At least I am. And it's hard for us to remember everything, and we're easily distracted. I mean, particularly in the modern world, right? Too much TV, video games, all that stuff. So it's easy to be distracted from what's really important in life. We have things to do, places to go, people to see. And so we need some way to remind ourselves to refocus. If you do meditation, which I don't do often enough, one of the tricks to meditation, and I learned this from having heard several tapes, they all kind of do the same thing. First of all, you're supposed to focus on something, a candle, some light music, maybe the rain falling or a stream flowing, right? So there's some focus thing, and you're supposed to focus your entire intention on that one thing. And then every time I'm doing a meditation tape, they all say the same thing. When your mind wanders, bring it back to your focus of attention. And then about 2 minutes later, they say the same thing. When your mind wanders, bring it back to your focus of attention. Why do they have to say that over and over again? Because our minds wander. That's why. So we have to think, we have to remind ourselves what's important in life. We're too easily distracted as human. And that's when we're trying to focus. We're doing meditation. We're trying to focus our minds, and our minds wander. So the point is to remember what's important in life. And that's what rituals come to do. They come at fixed times. And so we have to stop what we're doing and do the ritual. Now, when you stop and do the ritual, you're supposed to remember why you're doing it, right? So when you wear fringes on the corners of your garments, it says right there in the book of Numbers, look at those fringes and remember God's commandments, right? And remember what's important in life, right? The fringes are supposed to be reminders. What people used to say before computers and iPhones, they used to say, oh, I'm going to tie a string around my finger, and that'll remind me what I'm supposed to buy at the grocery store. Maybe people didn't know how to write bananas on a piece of paper. I don't know. But anyway, they would tie a string around their finger, and it was remind them of something. We were going to tie strings on the corners of our garments to remind us to keep God's commandments. Write it on a piece of parchment and stick it on the doorpost of your house. Why? So when you leave your house, you pass by the mezuzah on the doorpost, and it reminds you, oh, I'm going out into the world. There's a God who created the world, and all the people I'm going to meet are God's creatures, and I need to behave myself. I need to be fair and honest and just and kind and compassionate to everybody I meet. And then you come back home from the shopping mall or your work or wherever you went, and you pass by the same mezuzah when you enter your house. And everybody you meet in your house, your family and your friends, right? They're also God's creatures, right? I have to treat them with dignity and respect also, right? According to Ben Azai, who said they're created in the image of God, right? So the mezuzah is on the doorpost of your house to remind you of that. Now, unfortunately, rituals like this, when you do them regularly, you tend to forget why you're doing them. And then it defeats the whole purpose of having done it, right? So you have to kind of remind yourself to pay attention to the ritual and what the purpose of it is. But once you get there, right, the rituals have that purpose of reminding us of our values, our ideals, and our beliefs. And they do it on a regular basis. That's the value of rituals. They come up at regular times to serve as those reminders, like an alarm clock going off saying, oh yeah, right, I'm a creature of God, right? They also help us develop an intimate relationship with our Creator, especially prayer, which is one of the rituals. That's an opportunity to develop a relationship with God. So Shabbat designates sacredness of time, reminds us that we live in a created world. It reminds us the importance of being creative 6 days a week. You know, God was creative 6 days. We're supposed to be creative 6 days of the week, do our human creative activities, improving the world that God gave us. And then, like God, we rest on the seventh day, and instead of trying to change the world, we just enjoy it for what it is, right? Shabbat is the time to stop and smell the roses. Unless you're Orthodox, and then they tell you not to smell the roses because you might want to pick them. I'm a conservative rabbi. I say, smell the roses. It's good for you. In any case, yeah, this is a time to stop and enjoy the world just the way it is and not try to fix it or change it. You have 6 other days of the week to do that. Passover reminds us of the importance of freedom and how every human being should be free, how to treat strangers because we were strangers in Egypt. Shavuot reminds us of God's gift of wisdom to us and revealed presence of God in our history, in our lives. Sukkot reminds us of the fragility of life, right? After Yom Kippur, we go out and live in a shaky booth that's temporary to remind us that life is temporary. And again, to focus us on how we want to spend the coming year now that we've done our penitence with the Yom Kippur. Kashrut reminds us of the sacredness of animal life as well as human life, right? All of the laws of Kashrut are about restricting our diet for meat. And therefore, it teaches us every time we eat something kosher that all life is sacred, including animal life. Prayer, as I mentioned before, is a time to commune with our Creator. Reciting a blessing transforms an ordinary activity like eating into a sacred moment. When you say a blessing over your food, if you stop and think about the words instead of just, like I unfortunately do myself sometimes, just mumble the words, right? It reminds you that we're living in a special place. This planet is special, and it has all the everything we need to live, including the food we're eating. And we talked about tzitzit and so on. Finally, rituals also create a community and a society in which everyone supports each other in times of need and celebrates together at times of joy, and is able to promote our values on a grander scale. As Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has, right? What has allowed human beings to conquer the world is that we figured out how to cooperate with each other. One human being really can't control the world, could not control the world by themselves. Hopefully not, God forbid. So we need all of us together to work together. And the more we work together, the more powerful we are as a group, and powerful, hopefully, to promote these values of promoting goodness and kindness and justice and fairness and honesty in the world. Okay, so now we've looked at the Garden of Eden, and we've seen that the tabernacle has those elements which remind us of the Garden of Eden. So what is going on with that, given that Judaism seems to be trying to create an ideal society where people care and take care of each other? Well, what's inside that ark that the angels are now guarding, the Ark of the Covenant? I mentioned the Ten Commandments, but there's also apparently a Torah placed right next to it. According to Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 26, it says, "Take this book of teaching, Sefer HaTorah, and place it beside the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, and let it remain there as a witness against you." So the Torah, with its teachings, its values, its commandments that are supposed to guide us into creating this ideal world, is guarded by the same angels that guard the entrance to the Garden of Eden. So perhaps the Torah is like a treasure map, and the treasure map is a guide to find your way back to paradise, the hero's journey. We left paradise as Adam and Eve, and God is now trying to create a community, a society that can recreate paradise right here on earth, a way to find our way back to that ideal world that we left behind at the beginning of the biblical story. That would be the hero's journey. And there's a lot of challenges along the way, just like the hero's journey. A lot of struggles. We have a lot of things to overcome. Jews, for instance, like to argue with each other a lot. Eventually, we need to come to some kind of agreements about things in order to be able to accomplish stuff together. But we also need to work with other people around the world. We're not the only people on the planet. We're only 0.2% of the people of the planet. And so we need to work with everybody else to try and create this ideal world so that everybody can live together. One thing we've certainly learned from this COVID pandemic is we are all connected to each other. And it's not going to be good enough for us just to be vaccinated in this country. Everybody in the world needs to be vaccinated if we want to be free of this disease. And just like that's the case, the same thing with the climate and with other aspects of the world. If you want to make the world a better place, it can't be just our own community, it can't be just our own state or country. Certainly that's where we need to start, but we need to also look out for the world to try and create a better world for everybody. And that is certainly a challenge. That is some hero's journey that we're all going to be on. But if we follow that roadmap, we can in fact create paradise here on earth. Every mythic hero goes on a mythic journey and a quest. Creating paradise on earth is, I think, the Jewish quest. Okay, now I can entertain questions.
I just want to thank you and say this is beautiful, and it was very fast, and your energy at 7 p.m. is much better than that at 9 in the morning. So you you better change the Sunday classes into 7 p.m.
Did I go too fast?
No, awesome.
Okay.
That was great.
Okay. Any other thoughts or comments?
It was a fine talk. Thank you very, very much.
You're very welcome. So question here, why did peeking into the Ark of the Covenant kill people? Yeah, that is the Ark of the Covenant, at least in biblical times, was considered dangerous, right? There is a danger of coming too close to God, and that's kind of sort of another mythic motif, right? You see that in Greek literature with who's the one who had wax wings and flew to the heavens and then they melted? Icarus. Icarus, yeah, Icarus, right? Came too close to the sun, right? If you, of course, the Greeks believed the sun was a god. So the idea is it's dangerous to get too close to God, right? Human beings can't handle that intensity. And so, so getting that intense picture of God is too much. The rabbis describe that in an interesting passage in the Talmud. It's called the four who entered paradise. It actually has that same title. So what are they doing? They're meditating and trying to have an intimate connection to God. But it's a dangerous prospect, as the story relates. One of these rabbis went insane. One died on the spot. One left Judaism and just couldn't handle sort of contact with God at all anymore. And only one of the four came out whole, and that was Rabbi Akiba. So another mystical story about that. If you want a modern version of that for Star Trek fans, the original Star Trek show, there was the show that had the ambassador, which was these lights inside a box, right? And if you gazed inside that box, just like gazing inside the Ark of the Covenant, you would go crazy or kill yourself or whatever. It was way too dangerous to look at it because it was absolute truth. It represented absolute truth, which is what God represents. And only Mr. Spock could look at it, and only if he wore his sunglasses when he did it, right? But anyway, that's another modern example of that, that experience. Any other questions? Okay, well, so let's all try and create paradise on earth, right? That's our mission.
Rabbi, I got a request to share your slides. So if you wouldn't mind sharing
absolutely.
those, and I'm happy to send them out to the group.
We can definitely do that. We can do that. Also happy to share the PDF file of the text material if you would like. Okay, so if your mind wanders, bring it back to the mission.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right. Take care, everybody. Have a very good evening.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks, Rabbi.